The blood had already soaked through his shirt by the time she found him. Adriana knelt in the dirt beside the cottonwood grove, her fingers hovering above the man's chest, uncertain. He was white. That alone was reason enough to leave him, but his breathing was shallow, desperate, and something in the way his hand clutched at the earth made her hesitate. She'd been tracking a wounded pronghorn for hours, following its blood trail through the scrubland, and instead found this, a lawman, judging by the tarnished star half buried in the dust beside him. His eyes fluttered open, blue, pale as winter sky. They locked onto hers with a jolt of recognition that made no sense. "Sani," he whispered. Adriana's breath caught, the pronghorn forgotten, the world forgotten. That was her mother's name. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 8 years, not since the sickness took her mother and left Adriana alone on the edges of 2 worlds, neither white nor fully accepted by the band that had taken her in after her. Comanche father died in a skirmish she barely remembered. She lived now in the in-between, a shadow among her people, a ghost to the settlers. "How do you know that name?" Her voice came out harder than she intended, but the man's eyes were already closing again. His lips moved, blood flecked the corner of his mouth. "She told me to find you." Adriana's heart hammered. This man was dying, delusional maybe, but he knew her mother's name. He knew it in a way that felt like a door cracking open to a past she'd been locked out of her entire life. She glanced around the grove. No horse, no sign of how he'd gotten here or who'd put a bullet in him. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in shades of rust and ash. If she left him, he'd be dead by morning. Coyotes would find him first. She should leave him. But her hands were already moving, tearing strips from the hem of her buckskin dress, pressing them against the wound in his side. He groaned, a low animal sound, and his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't let them find me." "Who?" His eyes rolled back, unconscious. Adriana sat back on her heels, chest tight. The smart thing would be to walk away. She owed this man nothing. She owed white men less than nothing. But he'd spoken her mother's name like a prayer, like it meant something. And now he was bleeding out under a cottonwood tree with no one but her to decide whether he lived or died. The wind picked up, rattling the dry leaves above her. She made her choice. It took her an hour to drag him to the small cave she'd been using as a shelter. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight and slick with sweat. She propped him against the stone wall, built a small fire despite the risk, and set to work cleaning the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, lucky, if you could call any of this lucky. She packed it with yarrow root and whiskey from a flask she found in his coat, then bound it tight. He didn't wake. Adriana sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, watching the fire cast shadows across his face. He was older than she'd first thought, maybe 40, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, old and faded. This was a man who'd lived hard, and somehow he knew her mother. She reached for his coat, hesitated, then searched it. A few coins, a folded piece of paper, a wanted notice too worn to read, and tucked into the inner pocket, a small photograph, cracked and yellowed at the edges. Adriana's hands trembled as she held it up to the firelight. It was her mother, younger, smiling, standing beside a white man in a suit. Not this man, someone else. Behind them, a wooden building with a sign she couldn't make out. Her mother's hand rested on the man's arm, easy and familiar. Adriana stared until her eyes burned. She had no photographs of her mother, no keepsakes. When Sani died, the fever had taken everything. Her stories, her voice, the answers to questions Adriana had been too young to ask. All she had were fragments, the memory of braided hair, the smell of sage, a lullaby sung in 2 languages. And now this stranger carried her mother's face in his pocket. "Who are you?" she whispered to the unconscious man. The answer came 3 hours later, not from him, but from the sound of horses outside the cave. Adriana froze, voices low, careful, the crunch of boots on gravel. "Tracks lead this way. If he's alive, we finish it." She moved fast, smothering the fire, dragging the sheriff deeper into the shadows. Her knife was in her hand before she realized she'd drawn it. The voices grew closer, 2 men, maybe 3, split up. He's got to be close. Adriana pressed herself against the cave wall, barely breathing. The sheriff stirred beside her, a groan building in his throat. She clamped a hand over his mouth, her other hand pressing the knife to his chest. Not a threat, a warning. His eyes opened, focused on hers, and in that moment, some silent understanding passed between them. He stayed quiet. The footsteps paused just outside the cave entrance. A shadow stretched across the ground. Adriana's pulse roared in her ears. Then a shout from further off. Over here, found his horse. The shadow retreated. The boots hurried away. Adriana didn't move for a full minute. When she finally exhaled, her whole body shook. The sheriff's hand found hers in the dark, squeezed once. "Thank you," he rasped. She pulled her hand away. "Tell me how you knew my mother, or I'll let them find you next time." He told her at dawn. His name was Jacob Farrow. He'd been a deputy in a town called Salvation Creek, back when Adriana's mother had worked in the general store, before she'd married Adriana's father, before she'd left the white world behind. Jacob had been young then, green and sunny, had been kind to him, in a place where kindness was rationed like water in a drought. "She saved my life once," he said, voice rough from disuse. "Lied to a man who would have killed me. Told him I'd ridden out that morning, when I was hiding in the stockroom with a bullet in my leg." He coughed, winced. "I owed her, always did." "Then why are you here now? Why carry her picture?" Jacob's gaze dropped to the photograph, still clutched in Adriana's hand. "Because she asked me to find you, sent me a letter years ago, said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure you were all right." Adriana's throat tightened. "She died 8 years ago. I know, took me this long to track you down, and by the time I did," he gestured weakly at the wound in his side, "got complicated. Who shot you? Men I used to work with. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Evidence, names, people in Salvation Creek who've been stealing land from the Comanche, forging claims, killing anyone who got in the way." His jaw clenched. "Your mother's husband, your father, he was one of them. They killed him because he wouldn't sign over tribal land." The words hit like a fist. Adriana had always been told her father died in a skirmish with settlers, a misunderstanding, bad luck, not murder. "They wanted me to bury it," Jacob continued. "When I refused, they decided I was a liability." Adriana stared at him, rage and grief tangling in her chest. "And now you've brought them here, to me. I didn't mean you should have stayed away." Before he could respond, the sound came again. Hoofbeats, closer this time, not passing through, circling. Adriana moved to the cave entrance, peering out. 3 riders, maybe a quarter-mile off, combing the scrubland in a loose line. One of them pointed toward the cottonwood grove. They were methodical, patient, hunting. She ducked back inside. "They're coming." Jacob tried to stand, gasped and collapsed back against the wall. "Go. Leave me. They don't know about you. They will if I leave a trail." Adriana stopped talking. She grabbed his arm, hauled him upright. He bit back a scream, sweat pouring down his face. They stumbled toward the back of the cave, where a narrow fissure led deeper into the rock. She'd explored it days ago. It twisted for 30 feet before opening into a small canyon on the other side. It was their only chance. The hoofbeats grew louder, voices now calling to each other. "Check the cave." Adriana shoved Jacob into the fissure. He barely fit. She squeezed in after him, pulling a loose rock across the entrance just as boots echoed into the cave behind them. In the dark, Jacob's breathing was ragged, too loud. "Sure," she breathed, her hand finding his in the blackness. Footsteps, the scrape of a boot, a voice. "Nothing here, just ash." A pause. "Then he's close. Keep looking." The footsteps retreated. Adriana waited until the sound of horses faded before she moved. They crawled through the fissure in silence, Jacob biting down groans, until the daylight opened before them. They collapsed in the canyon, gasping. Jacob looked at her, eyes glassy with pain. "Why are you helping me?" Adriana stared at the sky. "Because my mother would have." They rested in the canyon for 2 days. Adiana hunted, brought back jackrabbit and wild onions, boiled water from a nearby spring. Jacob's fever spiked on the first night, and she sat with him, pressing cool cloth to his forehead, whispering the lullaby her mother used to sing. Half Comanche, half English, the words blurred together like the borders of her own heart. On the second day he was lucid again. "Tell me about her," Adiana said quietly. Jacob smiled, faint. She was stubborn, laughed louder than anyone I ever met, used to say the world tried to make her small, but she refused. He paused. "She talked about you all the time, said you had her temper and your father's eyes, said you'd be strong." Adiana's vision blurred. She blinked hard. "She wanted you to have this." Jacob reached into his boot, wincing, and pulled out a small beaded bracelet, turquoise and white, faded but intact. "She gave it to me the day I left Salvation Creek. Said if I ever found you, I should tell you. She never stopped loving you, even when the world she lived in tried to tear her apart." Adiana took the bracelet with shaking hands. She recognized the pattern, her mother's work. She'd seen it in fragments, in memories she wasn't sure were real. Now it was real. She tied it around her wrist, the beads cool against her skin. "They'll kill you if you go back," she said. "I know." "Then don't." Jacob shook his head. "I have to. The evidence I found, it's hidden in Salvation Creek. If I don't get it to the right people, those men will keep stealing, keep killing. Your father won't be the last. You can barely stand. I'll manage." Adiana stared at him. This man who'd carried her mother's memory across years and miles, who'd risked everything for a promise to a dead woman. "Then I'm coming with you." "Adiana, you don't get to tell me no. This is my fight too." Jacob held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded. That night she sat beside him under the stars, the bracelet warm on her wrist. For the first time since her mother died, she didn't feel alone. "She'd be proud of you," Jacob said softly. Adiana didn't answer, but deep down she let herself believe it. They rode into Salvation Creek at dusk. Jacob slumped in the saddle, Adiana leading the horse. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. A main street, a church, a saloon, bleeding light and laughter into the dim. Eyes followed them. Whispers rippled like wind through dry grass. Jacob directed her to a boarding house on the edge of town. The owner, an old woman with silver braids, took one look at them and ushered them inside without question. "Mary," Jacob rasped. "The papers, still where you left them," Mary said, her voice firm. "But those men have been sniffing around. You don't have much time." Adiana helped Jacob into a chair. Mary disappeared into a back room, and returned with a leather satchel, bulging with documents. She set it on the table. "Everything's here. Land deeds, forged signatures, names." Jacob nodded, exhausted. "Get it to Judge Hammond in Santa Fe. He's the only one I trust." "And you?" Mary asked. "I'll stay. Make sure no one follows you." "Jacob." "It's done, Mary." Adiana looked between them, something cold settling in her gut. "You're not coming." Jacob met her eyes. "I'm slowing you down, and if those men find me here, they'll be too busy to chase you." "That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's the only way." Rage flared in Ayana's chest. "My mother saved you so you could throw your life away." Jacob flinched. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand. "She saved me so I could do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what you're doing now too." Adiana wanted to scream, to fight, but she saw it in his eyes, the resolve, the peace. He'd already made his choice. Mary pressed the satchel into Ayana's hands. "I'll get you a horse. You leave tonight." Adiana didn't move, couldn't. Jacob squeezed her hand. "Your mother told me once that the bravest thing a person can do is choose who they want to be, even when the world tells them they can't. You've already done that, Ayana. Don't stop now." Tears burned her eyes. She nodded. Mary led her to the stable. Adiana mounted the horse, the satchel strapped across her back. She looked back at the boarding house one last time. Jacob stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight. He raised a hand. She raised hers. Then she rode. 3 weeks later, Judge Hammond received a satchel of documents that would dismantle a land theft ring spanning 2 territories. Arrests were made, families received restitution, and in the official record, a note appeared, evidence delivered by A.D. Farrow. Jacob Farrow's body was found in Salvation Creek 5 days after Ayanna left. He'd been shot twice. The men responsible were never caught, but Ayanna lived. She rode west, carrying her mother's bracelet and the memory of a lawman who'd kept a promise. She never returned to Salvation Creek. She didn't need to. She'd already taken back what was stolen, not land, but the truth. And in the years that followed, when she told her own children the story of a lonely sheriff who whispered a name in the dust, she would smile, because her mother had been right. The world tried to make them small, but they refused. A bracelet of turquoise and white, worn smooth by time, resting on the wrist of a woman riding toward a horizon painted gold.